I wanted to tell you a story to start off with. So some years ago, during my book tour for Muse of Nightmares, I was in the middle of the United States, St. Louis, Missouri, and I was speaking in a public library. Now, I live in Oregon, and I'm originally from California, and it's a simplification, but also mostly accurate to say that the coasts are politically on the left wing, and the middle and south is right wing and conservative. And I have heard, and it's true, that the South here is also maybe more religious and conservative, so maybe it's similar. But, of course there are Republicans in California and Democrats in Missouri, but the culture is definitely different. And, I live in Portland, Oregon, which is so blue or progressive that we call it a bubble, And when you live in a bubble surrounded by like-minded people, it's really easy to lose touch with what the rest of the country is like. So when you go to, say, Texas or Kansas, you have to watch your assumptions and expect to encounter opinions that aren't only the opposite of yours, but aggressively the opposite. So I was in this library, and most of the audience were readers who had come there to hear me and were already fans of my books, but there are usually some patrons from the library who see something going on and drift over to see what it is. And this was during the Trump years, and it was at this exciting time when the bigotry that had for many years, though it was just as deep and present as ever, had been kept beneath the surface somewhat, at least in public discourse, and it had suddenly become acceptable again. And Trump had liberated the voice of racism and white nationalism from any sense of shame. So, Make America Great Again was a big racist coming out party where America's worst nature was validated, celebrated, and emboldened. And I was talking about my book, Muse of Nightmares, the second book in my duology, and in particular about what had emerged for me as the question of the book, which was, what do you do when you're confronted by a mind that cannot be changed, that is absolutely impervious to facts, logic, reason, and every kind of persuasion, and how terrifying that is, and how helpless it makes you feel to know that there is nothing that can ever get through to this person. And this one woman in the audience ejected out of her seat. And, she didn't raise her hand or anything. She just leapt up and demanded, why should you try to change someone's mind? What gives you the right? You have to agree to disagree. And I was immediately flooded with adrenaline. It was like she shoved me in the chest practically. That kind of challenge. It creates an altered state in your brain. Your fight or flight response is triggered. And it was this phrase, agree to disagree. And I don't know if you have something like that in Croatian, but especially in those years and in the States, it had really, it's forever, it's been a way of ending an argument with neither side conceding. It's a polite, way of accepting the other person's point of view as valid as yours, or at least you're saying it's their right to not be challenged for their beliefs. And it's the catchphrase of many family dinners across America because we're so deeply divided around politics and religion. And it's a way of keeping the peace with your homophobic grandparents, your racist uncles, and you just don't talk about certain things. And if it comes up, you use agree to disagree to diffuse the situation and disengage. But it's gotten harder over the years as the division has gotten deeper. And by now it's come to mean basically, back off. My racism is just as valid as your non-racism. Basically, I'm proud of my terrible beliefs and deserve to be left in peace. So this woman wanted to know, why should you try to change someone's mind? And this was in the context of my book, and the answer was, because they're going to kill everyone you love. And she said, oh, well, I haven't read the book and sat down. But I was now by this time, completely flooded with adrenaline, and I did not let it go. But I said something like, I do not agree to disagree, and then something about how some things are just universally unacceptable, and while it may be your right to hold certain beliefs, it is not your right to not be challenged for them. And that agreeing to disagree completely erases the social contract and any any fine line that might exist around human decency. And for further context, this was around the same time that Trump had changed the immigration policy so that children were being separated from their parents at the border and kept in detainment camps, small children and toddlers in literal cages. And there were children in cages in my book, which had been written before this happened and had seemed completely dystopian and impossibly horrific, and was now a reality in the United States. And the rhetoric on the right was so hideous and so dehumanizing and so unbelievable, and always coming from Christians who perform the most remarkable mental gymnastics by spouting their bigotry in the name of Jesus. It's really incredible the beliefs people can hold comfortably side by side. But to make a long story short, the woman got up and left. And I'm positive I was not rude to her. But she challenged me and I challenged her back. And we each triggered each other, me by daring to suggest that not all beliefs are equally valid, and her by suggesting that they are. And so she left, which is fine. But the pity of this, and my regret afterwards, is that if I handled it differently, she might have read my books. And my books would have done a much better job of challenging her beliefs than I could ever do by arguing with her. Because this is, I think, the secret magic power of fantasy books, is that they're masters of infiltration. They challenge by stealth. All fiction gives us these exploratory terrains of experience, places where we can live other lives, experience other worldviews, try on feelings and relative safety. But people are so densely woven of their allegiances, identities, indoctrination, and all of those things act as filters. And everything we read, witness, experience, learn, hear must pass through these layers of filters of our beliefs. And between culture, education, politics, religion, the chance of anything new making it through are pretty slim. In realistic fiction, all ideas are going to encounter a filter of a fixed and formed belief, which will have reduced the entire issue to the simplicity of us versus them, yes or no, reject or allow. There's no nuance at all. And a belief once formed too often becomes a barrier. And only that which reinforces the barrier, the belief, will be permitted through. And anything else is just deflected. So all of the main forms of idea dissemination, journalism, nonfiction, education, debate, and even mainstream realistic fiction just get caught in the filters. Nothing gets through. But fantasy has a chance. And I think it's really funny that literature and its keepers love to dismiss fantasy as unserious, unrealistic, escapist, childish, because those of us who read it know that all the issues in fantasy are human issues. Big, important human issues. And whether the characters are actually human or not, all the conflicts and flaws, crimes, triumphs, and emotions are human. Anything that comes from us is about us. But in fantasy, what we do is we remove the obvious tags and labels that would allow the mind to make those immediate judgments of us or them. Yes or no, reject or allow. So that first allows things to get past the filter, where secondarily it forces the reader to evaluate them by other, more sophisticated factors. And this is how fantasy is a self-infiltrator of closed minds. And if you really want to deploy something into a closed mind, your chances of success are far better if you send it by dragging